In 1944, somewhere in the Pacific, the horizon was empty. No land, no port, only the hard glitter of metal against sun. Yet, out of that silence came the sound of engines and cranes. Steel pontoons locked together, welders leaned into sparks, and a new shape began to rise from the sea. Each block weighed hundreds of tons, each tow line stretched across miles of water. The modules drifted into position, joined by hand signals and noise. Pumps groaned as ballast tanks filled and emptied. Gradually, the surface changed. Flat water turned into framework, waves striking against steel that did not yield. Within days, decks appeared where the charts showed nothing. Runways, fuel lines, workshops, power cables. Aircraft would soon land where there had never been land at all. At night, the lights burned white across the swells. Men slept inside steel walls that moved with the tide, their hammocks swinging beside generators. The ocean rolled on beneath them, but they no longer cared. They had built something that defied geography itself. From the air, it looked impossible, an island of industry adrift in blue water. But its coordinates were real, its cranes working through the dark. It was not an island. It was America floating. In 1942, the Pacific was an ocean of distance. Between Hawaii and Japan lay 5,000 miles of empty water, broken only by scattered reefs and coral atolls. Every operation struggled against that void. Ships had to carry their own repair yards, aircraft their own fuel. For the United States, the Pacific was not just a battlefield. It was a barrier. Pearl Harbor had recovered from ruin, yet its position made it a rear base, not a springboard. Damaged vessels limped home across half an ocean, losing weeks that strategy could not afford. The Japanese Navy built its defense on that fact. Distance, they believed, would keep their empire safe. But by 1943, the equation began to change. America's industrial tempo had reached full speed. Carriers launched farther west each month, and supply convoys moved with mechanical regularity. What had once been space between battles was becoming a logistical vacuum, one that engineers meant to fill. The Bureau of Yards and Docks, working with the Seabees, received a problem that read like a paradox: build a base where no land existed. The idea was simple in theory, impossible in practice. If steel could float, then geography could be replaced by engineering. Each section would be watertight, self-powered, and able to lock to the next. Combined, they would form a dry dock capable of lifting a ship from the ocean. The ocean itself would become the foundation. Tests began in hidden yards along the California coast. Welders assembled giant rectangles of steel fitted with valves, cranes, and ballast tanks. When the first module entered the water, it floated exactly on line. It could sink under control, rise when pumped dry, and remain stable under weight. The ocean no longer dictated the limits of construction. At the same time, Japanese command underestimated what industry could do. They still believed ports required harbors, that repairs demanded coastlines. They measured defense by distance. America had stopped measuring distance altogether. In the spring of 1943, orders spread across the West Coast: build, ship, repeat. Each dock section would travel in convoy across the Pacific and assemble into something the world had never seen: a port without land, a harbor without shore. No one outside the Navy knew the plan. To those who did, the concept felt like invention turned into territory. Soon, fleets would steam through blue water toward bases not marked on any map. They would build land where no land existed. The first blueprints appeared in early 1943. They showed a structure unlike anything afloat, a dry dock without a shore. The designation read ABSD-1, meaning Advanced Base Sectional Dock. It would not sail nor anchor like a ship. It would rise and sink at will, forming a basin large enough to lift a battleship clear of the ocean. Each section measured 256 feet long and 93 feet wide, weighing more than 3,000 tons. 10 of them, joined end to end, created a dock nearly 1,000 feet long. Inside its walls ran ballast tanks, pumps, and valves that could flood or empty in minutes. The result was mechanical precision, steel floating with the stability of land. The Bureau of Yards and Docks directed the program. Its execution fell to America's newest construction force, the Seabees. They were carpenters, welders, crane operators, men who had built skyscrapers and shipyards before the war. Now they worked in yards from Alameda to Mobile, building not vessels, but the infrastructure to repair them. Under floodlights, sparks drifted over the water like fireflies. Every component carried logic. Hinged locks aligned with tolerances measured in fractions of an inch. Electric generators supplied power to pumps embedded within the hulls. Deck cranes could lift a destroyer's propeller as easily as a steel beam. The dock was not a ship, it was architecture that happened to float. Schedules moved faster than belief. Shifts never ended. Crews rotated while machines kept running. Welding crews worked beside draftsmen, their drawings updated daily as improvements appeared. Each yard treated the Pacific like an assembly line stretching beyond the horizon. In May, the first sections rolled down greased rails into water. They floated perfectly level. The Navy ran tests. Ballast flooded evenly. Valves responded instantly. Decks remained stable, even under swell. A destroyer was brought in for trial. The dock sank by plan, the ship entered, and the pumps reversed. Within half an hour, steel rose from sea. The hull hung in air, dripping. The test ended with one word in the log: operational. Production multiplied. New docks, ABSD-2, ABSD-3, ABSD-4, were ordered before the first had even left harbor. Each was built in modular fragments across multiple yards, then assembled like puzzles. Transporting them became its own campaign. No single ship could carry their weight, so tugs were assigned in chains, each responsible for one massive section. Every figure grew. A complete dock required over 100,000 tons of steel, 30 miles of welded seam, and more than 150,000 bolts. Each component was stamped, logged, and assigned to a numbered convoy. The process was mathematical, without pause for improvisation. In Washington, Admiral Ben Morial, chief of the Bureau, described the docks as portable territory. His phrasing captured the strategy. The Pacific would no longer determine where the fleet could fight. The docks would extend the coastlines of America, one floating base at a time. Training followed logic as rigid as the design. Seabees practiced in shallow bays, assembling and disassembling prototype sections. They rehearsed every valve sequence, every flood cycle, until movement became reflex. They learned to weld underwater, to adjust ballast while standing ankle-deep in the ocean. No task could wait for calm seas. By autumn, shipyards resembled cities. Gantry cranes walked the waterfront like giants, swinging steel plates into position. The noise was constant. Arc light, hammer, compressor, the soundtrack of industrial war. Each dock that launched carried with it the pattern of the next. The yards had found rhythm. The scale drew attention even from those outside the Navy. Newspapers referred to secret floating fortresses, though the truth was more precise. These were tools, not weapons, extensions of the production line into the theater of war. If they succeeded, the Pacific would no longer separate fleets from their factories. The factory itself would move west. In December 1943, ABSD-1 completed final inspection. Its 10 sections stretched across a quiet bay, connected by steel hinges that flexed like the spine of a machine. At full elevation, its cranes towered higher than a destroyer's mast. The dock could submerge to a depth of 38 feet, then lift 90,000 tons from the water without strain. It was proof that industry had mastered buoyancy. Where once only ships could travel, now whole ports could move. Engineers walked its decks with clipboards in silence, measuring success in degrees and seconds. Morial's report summarized it in one line: "The sea is no longer neutral ground." By early 1944, convoys stood ready. Tugs idled under gray skies, their decks piled with coiled cables and fuel drums. Crews in life vests waited beside massive hulls that floated half-submerged, chained together for the crossing. Somewhere beyond the horizon lay the islands of the Central Pacific, where these sections would lock into shape and give the fleet a new home. In the yards, final welders signed initials into hidden seams, a small mark inside a structure built for scale, not memory. The blueprints that began as lines on paper had become a machine too large for any one coast to hold. By spring, America was ready to send its first artificial harbors across the ocean. Each convoy carried a new kind of weapon, engineering itself. By 1944, the design had left the drawing board. The Pacific was about to gain its first man-made land. The first convoy left the American coast before dawn. 10 gray sections drifted from the fog, each chained to its tug, each larger than the ships escorting it. The Pacific waited without motion. Engines rose to tow speed, cables drew taut, and the formation moved west, an armada of rectangles, not warships. Each module was a world of its own. Crews checked ballast hourly, opening valves by chart to keep the decks level to the inch. Every gauge was watched, every seam logged. If one section twisted, the entire dock would fail to align. The sea was not enemy, but measurement. Days passed under hard light. Swells moved beneath the steel like breath under skin. Men worked by stopwatch, checking draft, temperature, torque. Destroyer escorts circled at distance, radar turning, sonar pulsing. Convoys that once carried ammunition now carried geometry. By the 5th day, the coast was gone, replaced by an unbroken horizon and the rhythmic pulse of the pumps. A storm found them mid-ocean. White spray shattered against flat bows, rolled down the plates, and vanished through scuppers. Hatches sealed, ballast flooded for stability. Inside, men listened to the thud of each wave against their walls. Hours later, the storm passed. The log showed one line, no deviation, all units level. The dock had endured its first test from the sea. It was built to master. When they reached safe anchorage, the sections split by order. Some turned toward Ulithi, others toward Manus and Eniwetok. Each carried its own crew of Seabees, engineers, welders, electricians, ready to turn ocean into infrastructure. Tugboats peeled away, setting new headings like clock hands across the Pacific. At Ulithi, the lagoon lay still as glass. From the air, it looked empty. From the surface, infinite. The first section entered slowly, chains clinking, water sliding down its sides. Anchors dropped in 6 directions, fixed to the reef floor. Buoys marked the corners of the future dock. There was no ceremony, only precision. The second section approached, guided by whistles and hand signals. Steel met steel with a sound like thunder swallowed. Men swarmed the seam with bolts, torque wrenches clicking in unison. Divers descended to set backing plates beneath the joint. Valves opened, ballast flooded, and the dock sank by plan. Pumps reversed. Water drained away. Within hours, the first basin stood clear of the sea. A destroyer moved in, cables out fore and aft. When the dock rose, her hull lifted free, water streaming from her plates. The ship hung motionless, suspended in air above its own element. For the first time in the Pacific War, repairs began without retreat. Arc lights came on though the sun still burned above. Sparks cascaded into the basin. Hammers struck, grinders shrieked, rivets sealed the steel back to symmetry. Around them, the sea lay silent, reflecting the glow. The base had begun to breathe. Work followed rhythm more than command. Pump crews balanced levels. Crane operators swung cables through the night. The sound never stopped. Each man knew his station. Each minute had value. There was no waiting for morning. Repairs meant hours saved, and hours meant battles won. By the 3rd day, the pattern stabilized. Ships entered, lifted, repaired, and left on schedule. Fresh convoys brought more sections, tugs pushing them through the pass like pieces of a living puzzle. Each new section locked to the last, extending the platform further into the lagoon. Cranes multiplied, workshops spread, and storage tanks floated into position behind the walls. What had been open water now had form. Fuel lines stretched from anchored tankers to pumping stations. Oil flowed across steel decks, feeding generators that hummed with constant rhythm. Warehouses rose from deck planking bolted to steel. Cables snaked through conduits between modules. The ocean floor mattered less each day. At night, the lagoon shone white under arc lamps. Seabees welded inside walls slick with condensation. The air smelled of salt and iron. Some slept on cots beside the machinery, lulled by the throb of generators. The dock had become a city without streets, alive through motion alone. One evening, a cruiser entered under her own power. The dock sank to depth, her hull fitting within inches. Pumps drained the basin dry. Engineers walked the exposed keel, marking damage with chalk. Plates were cut out and replaced before dawn. The next day, she steamed away at full power. Time on blocks, 31 hours. Reports moved back to Fleet Command. Repairs completed at Ulithi, units operational. No coordinates were listed, only results. The base did not need a name. Its function defined it. From the air, pilots reported the site to intelligence officers. Floating city, one wrote in disbelief, cranes taller than ships, lights on all night. The photographs returned to Japan confused analysts who could not tell where the land ended. Their maps showed nothing there. Inside the lagoon, the base kept expanding. A second dock began assembly parallel to the first. Crews laid anchor patterns with the precision of surveyors. Each chain tensioned to specific tonnage, every hinge calibrated before connection. On deck, a small signal tower blinked coded lights across the water, directing tugs and repair craft. By the second week, 4 basins operated simultaneously. Destroyers, cruisers, and submarines rotated through with industrial regularity. Work orders replaced battle reports. Paint crews followed welders, checking seams for leaks. The tempo grew until the line blurred between shipyard and fleet. Fuel barges moored on the windward side, their hoses stretched across the water like arteries. Ammunition ships lay apart, guarded by patrol craft that kept distance against stray sparks. Supply tenders moved constantly, hauling everything from turbines to bread. The ocean had turned into infrastructure. The dock's cranes ran without pause, their motors groaning under the weight of engines and turrets. Machine shops worked in shifts, lathes spinning shafts by blue arc light. The numbers posted at the head of the dock told the story better than words. Repairs completed, tons lifted, ships returned to line. Each one marked another inch of ocean reclaimed by industry. At dusk, the lagoon glowed faintly orange under the last sun. The base continued, indifferent to time. From shore, if any remained to see it, the horizon no longer looked natural. It looked deliberate, straight lines, moving cranes, smoke drifting over a city that floated. By month's end, the Pacific held its first industrial colony, a factory built from sea and steel, silent only when engines paused to refuel. Commanders in Pearl Harbor called it a miracle of logistics. The men who built it called it something else, home. And still, the work continued. New sections waited outside the pass. The charts had already been redrawn to include them. The base would grow again westward until the war itself ran out of ocean. By dawn, the last gap vanished. Dogs turned, bolts seated, gauges held steady. Pump crews read levels in chorus until every dial matched. The structure no longer felt experimental. It moved with the calm of a system that knew its own load. The board at the head of the dock changed role. Instead of assembly steps, it listed priorities by hour. Hulls with propulsion damage stood first, structural work next, electronics last. When one ship cleared, a tug had already taken lines for the next. The white spaces on the schedule closed like doors. Service Squadron 10 spread the grid across the lagoon. Oilers lay windward, ammunition ships apart behind patrol screens, water barges along the lee. Signals relied on a strict code to keep mistakes impossible. A wrong cleat could cost a day. A day now meant a battle. The grid made such errors rare. Power came up in increments and locked to frequency. Cables crossed water on floating saddles, tags marking circuits for shops and cranes. New machines arrived with each convoy bolted down and wired in minutes. Lathes turned shafts precisely to gauge. Presses formed frames from plate cut at dawn. A yard's inventory lived inside steel rooms that floated. Triage teams met every incoming hull. They measured strain with taut wires and chalked repair lines in clean arcs. The report fit a single page with times beside tasks. Welders struck arcs on command. Fitters laid frames under their boots and drilled to pattern. Numbers replaced adjectives. The dock answered numbers with hours. Air operations grew from edges into routine. Seaplane tenders lifted observation aircraft from flat water and swung them to stands. Aviation fuel moved under ground rules that were written for safety and speed. Hose teams grounded lines, checked filters, and logged every gallon. Engines barked at idle, then settled. Prop wash threw salt into white fans and dried on steel. Night did not change tempo. Blackout shields dimmed light without slowing work. Searchlights stayed dark. Floods pointed down. The sound carried across the anchorage like wind passing through wires. The only silence came at whistle points for shift change. Men ate and slept inside the same gray walls, waking to machinery rather than daylight. A carrier cleared with new elevators and repaired catapults. Log entries weighed more than speeches. She took a pilot tug and turned for the channel. Hours later, fighters traced circles above the lagoon. Their decks had been steel the night before. The cycle closed with contrails that faded before the ink dried. Weather pushed in with a long swell from the east. Trim tables dictated ballast in paired tanks to damp roll. Mooring lines creaked on chain that bit hard. Work slowed only to safe pace. The mathematics of buoyancy did what concrete does on land. The sea accepted weight and returned stability on schedule. Throughput doubled by week 3. Chalk vanished from the board, replaced by printed sheets. Reports to Fleet Command listed lifts, labor hours, and material consumed. Value appeared as days given back to combat. A destroyer captain recorded that battle damage no longer meant leaving theater. It meant a turn across flat water and a place in line. Rumor carried farther than signals. Reconnaissance photographs showed rectangles where charts showed nothing. Pilots wrote of cranes higher than masts and sparks beneath overcast that looked like weather. Crews returned to their ships with fresh seams and a new certainty. Distance had moved. It stood now on their side. The base learned to feed itself. Refrigeration plants maintained cold chain through noon heat. A bakery produced bread from sacks delivered with the tide. Medical bays turned torch burns and grinder cuts into clean bandages, and men back on shift. The colony at sea gained a city's habits without streets or addresses. Ammunition handling followed a single narrow lane. Boats signaled before entry. Fuses stayed cased until benches were ready. One watch tracked lot numbers against hulls and time. The system had no drama, which was why it worked. A wrong turn here could lift numbers in reports for the enemy. None occurred. A cruiser arrived with her bow twisted by blast. Blocks kissed frames by plan. Plates came off in sheets. New pieces landed with a single swing. Rivet guns hammered into a tempo the ear remembered. The foredeck straightened line by line. She left under full power, the wake clean along a sharp stem. Repair time measured in days, not months. Across the lagoon's far side, causeways thickened and gained ramps. Trucks crossed water to reef-edge shops. Bulldozers pushed stone into wired baskets and made firm ground where surf had been at dawn. The distinction between floating and fixed blurred. The base reached outward, ready to receive whatever the next convoy chose to send. Communications improved. Short masts atop corner platforms carried radio whips and lamps. A control net assigned berths without pause. Messages moved from flag to clipboard to spanner in minutes. Ships no longer asked where to go. They were told by a voice that had become familiar in the last month. By dawn, an overflow basin took its first hull. A destroyer tender tied inboard and opened shops to the dock. Templates and jigs crossed a narrow strip of water. What one lacked, the other made. The seam between ship and base disappeared in practice. The lagoon hosted an alliance in steel that ignored the surface. An inspection team toured in silence. Notes filled pages. Orders remained brief. Increased tempo again. Heavy work shifted to deep night, heat falling away, sparks steady in cool air. A bell marked midnight across the grid to align clocks. The dock kept time for the fleet and obeyed only itself. Supplies adapted to appetite. Plate arrived in standard widths that matched the saw. Rod came in crates that slid into racks. Bolts were bagged by size and count to the drawing. Scrap dropped into a small furnace that cast fittings from offcuts. Waste shrank. Nothing left the grid without purpose. An aircraft tender rigged a platform for engine change at anchor. A barge delivered spares from dock shops to the tender's side. Mechanics pulled a tired unit and lowered a new one to rails. Test stands ran to limit inside tolerance. Before noon, aircraft that had slept silent taxied and lifted clear of the lagoon. News reached the dock with hulls that had been elsewhere. Scars arrived with stories and departed with fresh paint. Damage became a transaction measured in shifts. The extraordinary settled into routine because the routine had been designed for scale. The board advanced lines without commentary. A new convoy entered at sunset with fresh modules under tow. The plan still extended beyond the horizon. Sections eased into position, tugs breathing smoke in long pulls, heaving lines arced to hands already waiting. One whistle sounded, locks clamped, another reach of deck took shape against the evening glare. The lagoon's map changed to accept new load. Anchors shifted, chain patterns redrew to keep even tension. Survey teams flagged soft patches and marked them off. The record updated before the next shift stepped aboard. Memory yielded to paper because paper did not forget under pressure. Month 2 closed with a ledger instead of a speech. Carriers, cruisers, and destroyers cycled through in numbers that once filled stateside yards. Average time on blocks fell under a week. Emergency lifts resolved in days. The fleet's radius widened in miles and hours. Space had been converted to schedule. A short runway of tight pontoons enabled liaison hops. Pilots touched wheels to steel that moved by fractions. They taxied to a stand and shut down, then walked to a gangway that led inside. The line between airfield and dock blurred as operations crossed from water to deck without pause. Threat never vanished. Patrol craft ran the pass every night. Lookouts scanned for floats and periscopes at low light. Guns stayed manned on the outer edge, though few spoke. The base trusted process, not luck. The routine itself had become armor where land offered none. A carrier group signaled departure at first light. Decks carried fresh aircraft and crews who had slept beneath the dock's lamps. The ships turned to open water and vanished into glare. The base returned to the board. A tug whistled for room at the head. Another hull waited with a log in hand. The pencil moved to the next line. By evening, new sections sat hard against the locks with doubled lines. Gauges held within tolerance. Pumps stood at ready. The call came from the pier with a time that matched the sheet. The dock answered with its usual word. Ready. The Pacific now hosted a factory that did not close. The Advance asked for hours, steel, and certainty. The base delivered all three on a surface that had once been excuse. The avalanche had its slope. It would not slow. When the war ended, the Pacific fell quiet. The cranes stood motionless, their cables hanging slack over water that no longer mattered. The floating airfields, once alive with engines and sparks, drifted in silence beneath the same sun they had defied. Their work was complete, but their presence lingered like monuments built on tide. Orders came quickly. The docks would be dismantled, towed home, or scuttled in deep water. Crews packed tools into crates marked "Return to States." Convoys formed again, their direction reversed. At Espiritu Santo, Seabees flooded ABSD-1 section by section until its gray towers slipped beneath the surface. At Guam, ABSD-3, the largest, was broken apart and towed east in slow procession. One took 21 days to vanish over the horizon. Men watched without words. They had built these structures under fire, joining metal on seas that wanted to unmake everything. Now they watched them sink in peace. The ocean that once carried war took back what had made it navigable. But the design remained. The ABSD program had rewritten the boundaries of construction. It had proved that engineering could overcome geography, that distance, fuel, and coastline were conditions, not limits. The same modular principles soon appeared in civilian use: oil platforms, floating shipyards, mobile bases. Offshore engineering became an industry born from necessity and perfected by routine. Historians later described the docks as the movable islands. The name fit. Each had been a self-contained city, generators, workshops, canteens, and barracks suspended over miles of water. They had no nationality except the flag that marked them, no geography except their coordinates. Their existence turned the sea into something measurable, something usable, a surface transformed by order. On the seabed, coral grew along the fallen structures. Fish circled through openings once filled with light. The shapes remained exact: straight beams, squared corners, flat decks. Nature worked slowly over the geometry of industry. From above, the water showed no trace, but the coordinates still matched the logs of 1944. In Washington, the reports ended with precision. Vessels serviced, 1,472. Personnel, 45,000. Sections constructed, 77. The final line read simply, "Performance exceeded projection." It was understatement at industrial scale. The system had functioned perfectly, then dissolved without demand for credit. For those who had lived aboard, memory came as sound. The pulse of pumps, the hiss of torches, the endless hum that blurred night and day. Letters home mentioned the feeling of sleeping inside steel that swayed, of waking to the same metallic dawn for months. Many never saw land until the war was over. For them, the ocean itself had become workplace, address, and nation. By 1946, most docks were gone. Some were scrapped for steel, some sold to foreign navies, a few left anchored until storms scattered them. Fragments of ABSD-2 still worked decades later, lifting cargo ships instead of carriers. Others lay forgotten beneath shallow water, rediscovered only by divers tracing coral-covered numbers along rusted beams. The legacy outlasted the war it served. Every modern offshore structure, every platform standing in storm seas, descended from those wartime docks. They carried the same logic: build in sections, float to position, lock in place, and let the ocean bear the load. What began as emergency architecture had become a method of permanence. In the years that followed, the Pacific changed purpose. Trade ships crossed where convoys once crawled. Airliners drew straight lines where fleets had turned. The water seemed endless again, but beneath it rested the outlines of an industrial miracle. They were not ruins, they were foundations, proof that human precision could inhabit even the world's emptiest spaces. The docks never received medals, but they carried victory. They allowed fleets to stay forward, campaigns to continue, and men to return alive who otherwise would not. Their story was not one of battle, but of calculation, the quiet mathematics that sustained the war until its end. When the last crews departed, they looked back once. The cranes were still, the decks empty. The Pacific rolled across them without resistance. What had been solid now moved again. What had been permanent returned to motion. The ocean had carried empires before, then it carried industry. And when both were gone, it remained, holding the shape of what America had built upon it, land that could move, and a future defined not by territory, but by design. The war had rewritten the limits of industry. Across the Pacific, silence replaced motion. The waves rolled over coordinates that once held cranes, engines, and men. The floating airfields were gone, but their outlines remained in memory, straight lines drawn on an ocean that no longer needed them. For America, those docks marked more than victory. They proved that the boundaries of land could be engineered away. Industry had extended beyond coastlines, creating a new geography made of logic and steel. The Pacific, once a void, had become a surface that obeyed mathematics. No headlines announced their disappearance. The reports closed with statistics, not sentiment. Yet the achievement lingered quietly inside every later structure built offshore. Each oil rig, each mobile base, each platform that stood against a storm carried their blueprint in its frame. The men who built them had turned distance into discipline. Their work ended the moment the ocean could no longer stop progress. That was their triumph, measured not in territory gained, but in boundaries erased. In time, the sea covered everything. But what they created had already outlasted water, charts, and memory. They built not to conquer land, but to remove the need for it. Reports moved back to Fleet Command. Repairs completed at Ulithi, units operational. No coordinates were listed, only results. The base did not need a name. Its function defined it. From the air, pilots reported the site to intelligence officers. "Floating city," one wrote in disbelief. "Cranes taller than ships, lights on all night." The photographs returned to Japan confused analysts who could not tell where the land ended. Their maps showed nothing there. Inside the lagoon, the base kept expanding. A second dock began assembly parallel to the first. Crews laid anchor patterns with the precision of surveyors, each chain tensioned to specific tonnage, every hinge calibrated before connection. On deck, a small signal tower blinked coded lights across the water, directing tugs and repair craft. By the second week, 4 basins operated simultaneously. Destroyers, cruisers, and submarines rotated through with industrial regularity. Work orders replaced battle reports. Paint crews followed welders, checking seams for leaks. The tempo grew until the line blurred between shipyard and fleet. Fuel barges moored on the windward side, their hoses stretched across the water like arteries. Ammunition ships lay apart, guarded by patrol craft that kept distance against stray sparks. Supply tenders moved constantly, hauling everything from turbines to bread. The ocean had turned into infrastructure. The dock's cranes ran without pause, their motors groaning under the weight of engines and turrets. Machine shops worked in shifts, lathe spinning shafts by blue arc light. The numbers posted at the head of the dock told the story better than words. Repairs completed, tons lifted, ships returned to line. Each one marked another inch of ocean reclaimed by industry. At dusk, the lagoon glowed faintly orange under the last sun. The base continued, indifferent to time. From shore, if any remained to see it, the horizon no longer looked natural. It looked deliberate, straight lines, moving cranes, smoke drifting over a city that floated. By month's end, the Pacific held its first industrial colony, a factory built from sea and steel, silent only when engines paused to refuel. Commanders in Pearl Harbor called it a miracle of logistics. The men who built it called it something else, home. And still, the work continued. New sections waited outside the pass. The charts had already been redrawn to include them. The base would grow again, westward, until the war itself ran out of ocean. By dawn, the last gap vanished. Dogs turned, bolts seated, gauges held steady. Pump crews read levels in chorus until every dial matched. The structure no longer felt experimental. It moved with the calm of a system that knew its own load. The board at the head of the dock changed role. Instead of assembly steps, it listed priorities by hour. Hulls with propulsion damage stood first, structural work next, electronics last. When one ship cleared, a tug had already taken lines for the next. The white spaces on the schedule closed like doors. Service Squadron 10 spread the grid across the lagoon. Oilers lay windward, ammunition ships apart behind patrol screens, water barges along the lee. Signals relied on a strict code to keep mistakes impossible. A wrong cleat could cost a day. A day now meant a battle. The grid made such errors rare. Power came up in increments and locked to frequency. Cables crossed water on floating saddles, tags marking circuits for shops and cranes. New machines arrived with each convoy, bolted down and wired in minutes. Lathes turned shafts precisely to gauge. Presses formed frames from plate cut at dawn. A yard's inventory lived inside steel rooms that floated. Triage teams met every incoming hull. They measured strain with taut wires and chalked repair lines in clean arcs. The report fit a single page with times beside tasks. Welders struck arcs on command. Fitters laid frames under their boots and drilled to pattern. Numbers replaced adjectives. The dock answered numbers with hours. Air operations grew from edges into routine. Seaplane tenders lifted observation aircraft from flat water and swung them to stands. Aviation fuel moved under ground rules that were written for safety and speed. Hose teams grounded lines, checked filters, and logged every gallon. Engines barked at idle, then settled. Prop wash threw salt into white fans and dried on steel. Night did not change tempo. Blackout shields dimmed light without slowing work. Searchlights stayed dark, floods pointed down. The sound carried across the anchorage like wind passing through wires. The only silence came at whistle points for shift change. Men ate and slept inside the same gray walls, waking to machinery rather than daylight. A carrier cleared with new elevators and repaired catapults. Log entries weighed more than speeches. She took a pilot tug and turned for the channel. Hours later, fighters traced circles above the lagoon. Their decks had been steel the night before. The cycle closed with contrails that faded before the ink dried. Weather pushed in with a long swell from the east. Trim tables dictated ballast in paired tanks to damp roll. Mooring lines creaked on chain that bit hard. Work slowed only to safe pace. The mathematics of buoyancy did what concrete does on land. The sea accepted weight, and returned stability on schedule. Throughput doubled by week 3. Chalk vanished from the board, replaced by printed sheets. Reports to Fleet Command listed lifts, labor hours, and material consumed. Value appeared as days given back to combat. A destroyer captain recorded that battle damage no longer meant leaving theater. It meant a turn across flat water and a place in line. Rumor carried farther than signals. Reconnaissance photographs showed rectangles where charts showed nothing. Pilots wrote of cranes higher than masts and sparks beneath overcast that looked like weather. Crews returned to their ships with fresh seams and a new certainty. Distance had moved. It stood now on their side. The base learned to feed itself. Refrigeration plants maintained cold chain through noon heat. A bakery produced bread from sacks delivered with the tide. Medical bays turned torch burns and grinder cuts into clean bandages and men back on shift. The colony at sea gained a city's habits without streets or addresses. Ammunition handling followed a single narrow lane. Boats signaled before entry. Fuses stayed cased until benches were ready. One watch tracked lot numbers against hulls and time. The system had no drama, which was why it worked. A wrong turn here could lift numbers in reports for the enemy. None occurred. A cruiser arrived with her bow twisted by blast. Blocks kissed frames by plan. Plates came off in sheets. New pieces landed with a single swing. Rivet guns hammered into a tempo the ear remembered. The foredeck straightened line by line. She left under full power, the wake clean along a sharp stem. Repair time measured in days, not months. Across the lagoon's far side, causeways thickened and gained ramps. Trucks crossed water to reef-edge shops. Bulldozers pushed stone into wired baskets and made firm ground where surf had been at dawn. The distinction between floating and fixed blurred. The base reached outward, ready to receive whatever the next convoy chose to send. Communications improved. Short masts atop corner platforms carried radio whips and lamps. A control net assigned berths without pause. Messages moved from flag to clipboard to spanner in minutes. Ships no longer asked where to go. They were told by a voice that had become familiar in the last month. By dawn, an overflow basin took its first hull, a destroyer tender tied inboard and opened shops to the dock. Templates and jigs crossed a narrow strip of water. What one lacked, the other made. The seam between ship and base disappeared in practice. The lagoon hosted an alliance in steel that ignored the surface. An inspection team toured in silence. Notes filled pages, orders remained brief. Increased tempo again. Heavy work shifted to deep night, heat falling away, sparks steady in cool air. A bell marked midnight across the grid to align clocks. The dock kept time for the fleet and obeyed only itself. Supplies adapted to appetite. Plate arrived in standard widths that matched the saw. Rod came in crates that slid into racks. Bolts were bagged by size and count to the drawing. Scrap dropped into a small furnace that cast fittings from offcuts. Waste shrank. Nothing left the grid without purpose. An aircraft tender rigged a platform for engine change at anchor. A barge delivered spares from dock shops to the tender's side. Mechanics pulled a tired unit and lowered a new one to rails. Test stands ran to limit inside tolerance. Before noon, aircraft that had slept silent taxied and lifted clear of the lagoon. News reached the dock with hulls that had been elsewhere. Scars arrived with stories and departed with fresh paint. Damage became a transaction measured in shifts. The extraordinary settled into routine because the routine had been designed for scale. The board advanced lines without commentary. A new convoy entered at sunset with fresh modules under tow. The plan still extended beyond the horizon. Sections eased into position, tugs breathing smoke in long pulls, heaving lines arced to hands already waiting. One whistle sounded, locks clamped. Another reach of deck took shape against the evening glare. The lagoon's map changed to accept new load. Anchors shifted, chain patterns redrew to keep even tension. Survey teams flagged soft patches and marked them off. The record updated before the next shift stepped aboard. Memory yielded to paper because paper did not forget under pressure. Month 2 closed with a ledger instead of a speech. Carriers, cruisers, and destroyers cycled through in numbers that once filled stateside yards. Average time on blocks fell under a week. Emergency lifts resolved in days. The fleet's radius widened in miles and hours. Space had been converted to schedule. A short runway of tight pontoons enabled liaison hops. Pilots touched wheels to steel that moved by fractions. They taxied to a stand and shut down, then walked to a gangway that led inside. The line between airfield and dock blurred as operations crossed from water to deck without pause. Threat never vanished. Patrol craft ran the pass every night. Lookouts scanned for floats and periscopes at low light. Guns stayed manned on the outer edge, though few spoke. The base trusted process, not luck. The routine itself had become armor where land offered none. A carrier group signaled departure at first light. Decks carried fresh aircraft and crews who had slept beneath the dock's lamps. The ships turned to open water and vanished into glare. The base returned to the board. A tug whistled for room at the head. Another hull waited with a log in hand. The pencil moved to the next line. By evening, new sections sat hard against the locks with doubled lines. Gauges held within tolerance. Pumps stood at ready. The call came from the pier with a time that matched the sheet. The dock answered with its usual word. Ready. The Pacific now hosted a factory that did not close. The Advance asked for hours, steel, and certainty. The base delivered all three on a surface that had once been excuse. The avalanche had its slope. It would not slow. When the war ended, the Pacific fell quiet. The cranes stood motionless, their cables hanging slack over water that no longer mattered. The floating airfields, once alive with engines and sparks, drifted in silence beneath the same sun they had defied. Their work was complete, but their presence lingered like monuments built on tide. Orders came quickly. The docks would be dismantled, towed home, or scuttled in deep water. Crews packed tools into crates marked "Return to States." Convoys formed again, their direction reversed. At Espiritu Santo, Seabees flooded ABSD-1 section by section until its gray towers slipped beneath the surface. At Guam, ABSD-3, the largest, was broken apart and towed east in slow procession. One took 21 days to vanish over the horizon. Men watched without words. They had built these structures under fire, joining metal on seas that wanted to unmake everything. Now they watched them sink in peace. The ocean that once carried war took back what had made it navigable. But the design remained. The ABSD program had rewritten the boundaries of construction. It had proved that engineering could overcome geography, that distance, fuel, and coastline were conditions, not limits. The same modular principles soon appeared in civilian use: oil platforms, floating shipyards, mobile bases. Offshore engineering became an industry born from necessity and perfected by routine. Historians later described the docks as the movable islands. The name fit. Each had been a self-contained city, generators, workshops, canteens, and barracks suspended over miles of water. They had no nationality except the flag that marked them, no geography except their coordinates. Their existence turned the sea into something measurable, something usable, a surface transformed by order. On the seabed, coral grew along the fallen structures. Fish circled through openings once filled with light. The shapes remained exact: straight beams, squared corners, flat decks. Nature worked slowly over the geometry of industry. From above, the water showed no trace, but the coordinates still matched the logs of 1944. In Washington, the reports ended with precision. Vessels serviced 1,472, personnel 45,000, sections constructed 77. The final line read simply, "Performance exceeded projection." It was understatement at industrial scale. The system had functioned perfectly, then dissolved, without demand for credit. For those who had lived aboard, memory came as sound. The pulse of pumps, the hiss of torches, the endless hum that blurred night and day. Letters home mentioned the feeling of sleeping inside steel that swayed, of waking to the same metallic dawn for months. Many never saw land until the war was over. For them, the ocean itself had become workplace, address, and nation. By 1946, most docks were gone. Some were scrapped for steel, some sold to foreign navies, a few left anchored until storms scattered them. Fragments of ABSD-2 still worked decades later, lifting cargo ships instead of carriers. Others lay forgotten beneath shallow water, rediscovered only by divers tracing coral-covered numbers along rusted beams. The legacy outlasted the war it served. Every modern offshore structure, every platform standing in storm seas, descended from those wartime docks. They carried the same logic: build in sections, float to position, lock in place, and let the ocean bear the load. What began as emergency architecture had become a method of permanence. In the years that followed, the Pacific changed purpose. Trade ships crossed where convoys once crawled. Airliners drew straight lines where fleets had turned. The water seemed endless again, but beneath it rested the outlines of an industrial miracle. They were not ruins. They were foundations, proof that human precision could inhabit even the world's emptiest spaces. The docks never received medals, but they carried victory. They allowed fleets to stay forward, campaigns to continue, and men to return alive who otherwise would not. Their story was not one of battle, but of calculation, the quiet mathematics that sustained the war until its end. When the last crews departed, they looked back once. The cranes were still, the decks empty. The Pacific rolled across them without resistance. What had been solid now moved again. What had been permanent returned to motion. The ocean had carried empires before, then it carried industry. And when both were gone, it remained, holding the shape of what America had built upon it: land that could move and a future defined not by territory, but by design. The war had rewritten the limits of industry. Across the Pacific, silence replaced motion. The waves rolled over coordinates that once held cranes, engines, and men. The floating airfields were gone, but their outlines remained in memory, straight lines drawn on an ocean that no longer needed them. For America, those docks marked more than victory. They proved that the boundaries of land could be engineered away. Industry had extended beyond coastlines, creating a new geography made of logic and steel. The Pacific, once a void, had become a surface that obeyed mathematics. No headlines announced their disappearance. The reports closed with statistics, not sentiment. Yet the achievement lingered quietly inside every later structure built offshore. Each oil rig, each mobile base, each platform that stood against a storm carried their blueprint in its frame. The men who built them had turned distance into discipline. Their work ended the moment the ocean could no longer stop progress. That was their triumph, measured not in territory gained, but in boundaries erased. In time, the sea covered everything, but what they created had already outlasted water, charts, and memory. They built not to conquer land, but to remove the need for it.